Hi, Cardstack community. My name is Chrissy. I'm the founding director of the Cardstack project, coming to you from the land of the Web3. Today, I'm joined by Ari Redboard, who is the head of legal and government affairs for TRM Lab, and we're going to talk about crime fighting, crypto style, Web3 style. Welcome, Ari.
Love it. No, thank you so much for having me. Really looking forward to this.
Excellent. So we want to focus today's discussion on our fireside chat, which we do every week. Talk to industry professionals who are working on different aspects of this crypto, blockchain, Web3, smart contract ecosystem, but also the surrounding services that makes this the future of the way we deal with finance, how to connect to each other, maybe how to organize ourselves. But obviously, when we do these things, we talk about the utopian vision and nothing can go wrong. And while that happens, there are concerns that something may have to be looked out for. And sometimes we can't look out for ourselves. We need help from people who are the crime fighters and then the watch guard to tell us to make sure we use this very powerful tool, very huge responsibility, Spider-Man style, with great power from great responsibility. And we're going to talk about the responsibility side today. So, Ari, can you tell us a little about what you do, what brought you to Web3, and what is your organization doing to be our watch guard in this new era?
Terrific. Yeah, no, I love the way you characterize it. And yeah, so Ari Redboard, head of legal and government affairs from your friendly neighborhood TRM Labs, and essentially we are a blockchain intelligence company. What we do is we work with law enforcement, and for law enforcement primarily we are a tracing tool for cryptocurrency to help them build investigations. And I know we'll go deep into this a little later,
Hmm.
but the unique thing about cryptocurrency and the blockchain is that all transactions essentially occur on an open ledger. And
Hmm.
that allows tools like TRM in the hands of great investigators to trace and track the flow of funds to build investigations. We also work with cryptocurrency businesses, exchanges, and other brokers and ATMs. And really, for them, we're their crypto compliance solution,
Hmm.
which means that they're using us to screen wallets and monitor transactions and to assure that illicit actors are not engaging with their platforms. We play a very similar role for traditional financial institutions that are starting to say, "Hey, I want to get into this cryptocurrency space. I want to get into Web3." So really, we are a compliance tool for cryptocurrency. By way of sort of crime fighting background, prior to joining TRM, I was a federal prosecutor
Uh-huh.
with the United States Department of Justice for about 11 years, where I focused on really the same types of crimes: illicit finance, money laundering, terrorist
Hmm.
financing.
More on
I
the traditional finance side or more
Sure.
cryptocurrency?
So it's a great question. So, starting out really sort of on that traditional finance side, and really where I'm sort of most comfortable is that intersection between money laundering and national security. So it was
Hmm.
always sort of terrorist financing, export control, sanctions, criminal prosecutions.
Right.
But honestly, in 2015, 2016, we started to see more and more money laundering occur in cryptocurrency,
Right.
particularly when you really started to focus on North Korea, which is really an early adopter of crypto for sanctions evasions and money laundering. So yeah, I then after I left the U.S. Attorney's Office, I spent a couple years at the U.S. Treasury Department working on a lot of these same issues with OFAC, which is the sanctions regulator,
Hmm.
FinCEN, which is the anti-money laundering regulator. So yeah, always really focused on these types of issues, and now I get it into now I get to do it in the crypto space.
That's really interesting. You mentioned that there is the investigation side, which is when the crime has already happened and helping kind of put the pieces together and figure out what happens. And then it also talk about the tool set for the crypto business and financial institution. It seems that those are more prevention, right? It's the screening and to be able to detect in real time that something is going wrong. Is what's the balance? Like, what do you see more efficacy? And are people really able to see while it happens, or is it really still something about using the open nature of blockchain to chase, but after the fact?
No, it's a great question. And look, I think there's this sort of misunderstanding, certainly in the United States, when people talk about sort of crypto being the Wild West, um, you know, and really from an anti-money laundering perspective, sort of compliance, um, crypto businesses, crypto exchanges that do business in the U.S. are money service businesses.
Hmm.
And to your question, they've all built out, or a lot of them, most of them, the ones that there are the large exchanges that everyone knows,
Right.
have built out robust compliance controls.
Right.
And what they do essentially is they use a tool like TRM as part of that compliance program to screen wallets to ensure that a sanctioned Russian oligarch is not trying to use their exchange to launder funds. And that is a tremendous use case. And to your question, that sort of offensive
Hmm.
tool, the proactive tool. Using our tool from an investigative standpoint, when you're investigating, it is always to some extent um, reactive. Something has already
Hmm.
happened. But what you're also really trying to understand is sort of trying to understand, the potential to recover funds, the potential to sort of trace those funds to an exchange, to an off ramp where you can gain more information. So
Right.
two separate use cases, but a lot of interplay between them.
Hmm. Are the two sets very similar, or do you think that an investigation stuff is really about exploration and trusting an investigator, a person who is looking and using the tool as an augmentation, almost like predator style, like like heads up display? That's how I'm imagining. I'm sure it's much cooler than that. But the prevention seems like to be checking for risk, looking at algorithms and stuff like that. Are there intersection between those tools, or is it something that's quite separate in the way it's executed?
There's a ton of intersection between the tools. For example, and I consider them really in the same tool suite in terms of
Hmm.
the way these are typically used. Take law enforcement off the table for a moment. Like, let's just talk about sort of how a cryptocurrency exchange, an FTX or a Binance or a Coinbase, would use a tool like this. And essentially, what they're doing is they're first monitoring transactions, they're screening wallets to ensure that they're not engaging with illicit actors.
Hmm.
But um, then they use that same tool, the forensics piece, the piece where you're creating a graph, where you're tracing funds. They then use that to build an investigation if they have had
Right.
illicit actors sort of engage with them. So there's definitely a lot of interplay between the two. Our clients typically use a suite of a number of different services, understanding sort of what are the risks associated with engaging with certain exchanges, or what FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, called VASPs.
Hmm.
A know your VASP component,
A virtual asset service provider, is that the acronym?
virtual asset service provider. And
Yeah.
look, every regulator on earth has different names for these things. The EU calls them CASPs.
Yeah.
The FATF calls them VASPs. It's there's all kinds of different names, but yeah, it's really the same concept. Is, do you exchange crypto for crypto? Do you exchange crypto for fiat? It's really
Right.
a cryptocurrency exchange, but also incorporates other cryptocurrency businesses.
Yeah. So do you see the tool set you have as obviously informed by the European kind of perspective, the US perspective, but there are many different jurisdictions have different risk level. How do you adopt the tool set to the different types of markets, or do you see a convergence towards the regulator's view and therefore the tools necessary to comply to regulation across the world?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's the latter, although I will say that there's so much movement, globally. I mean, there are, jurisdictions like Singapore and Hong Kong and the UK, and are really leading, and so many others, Bahamas, and I mean, so many
Right,
others
right.
are leading the way in this space where there's so much interesting regulation going on. The UAE is doing tremendous work.
Hmm.
The Abu Dhabi Global Markets just put out what I would say is the definitive regulatory framework for DeFi.
Right.
So there's so much that's sort of going on right now in the space. But yeah, no, these tools are really meant to help a cryptocurrency business, a cryptocurrency exchange, comply with whatever the regulatory framework is.
Right.
Um, because at a minimum, what you're seeing more and more these days is regulators, globally within the United States, really require that a regulated entity, a licensed entity in their jurisdiction, have these kinds of tools. The New York Department of Financial Services, which is one of the major sort of state regulators in the country,
Hmm.
really in the world, came out, I want to say a week or two ago, with guidance that said, hey, if you're a licensed entity in New York, you essentially have to have blockchain analytics solutions like
Right.
TRM in order to
Yes.
sort of meet your regulatory obligations. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. But these solutions really do work across regulatory frameworks. But I think to the overall question, the high level is, look, crypto changes everything, right? What you
Yeah.
have is you have cross-border value transfer now at the speed of the internet. And, every regulator on earth is coming to, kind of putting together their own solution. But really, and we're never going to have a truly global framework, but the
Hmm.
closer we can get to one, I think it would be very advantageous because it really will allow sort of a lot more of that, you know, global commerce to take place in the crypto space.
Yeah, I think it seems like it's like, you look at car safety, automobile safety, seatbelt and anti-lock brakes and like airbag and like, active uh, detection system kind of maybe innovate in one country and one kind of thing, but everybody's like, that's a good idea. And then if you manufacture a seatbelt or like cameras, you tend to be able to sell to manufacture in all countries because they just agree that that's a thing to have. So it's like regulation by proxy of tools, right? It's like we need those tools in our country. Seatbelts, good idea. So
Yeah,
it
no,
seems like
I
you
love that
guys are the
analogy.
airbag. You guys are the airbag manufacturer.
I love that analogy, and I definitely, Chris, I'm gonna steal that one. I think it's
Awesome.
awesome.
Feel
Yep,
free. No.
I will do.
Well, Cardstack, we formed the foundation in Switzerland, and we had an extensive conversation with FINMA. And as you know, FINMA do oversee more things than the individual U.S. entity do. So there's less fighting over who is in charge of the lunch table, and
Yeah,
more like a holistic view. So we see, in my personal view, as a project working on the decentralized side, not a centralized kind of service provider, more thinking about protocol, thinking about smart contract, and these are the things we produce at Cardstack, Ethereum style smart contract. It's really good to have regulator who are able to cross the boundary of the different asset class that used to be and look at them holistically. Is that what you're seeing in these jurisdictions like UAE, where they're looking at it holistically? And how does that compare to the ability for you to educate your former colleagues in the Treasury Department and stuff like that about how they can come up with a sensible framework so that entrepreneur working on these things can actually figure out how to innovate within the regulatory um, um, directions.
yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I think that the hope of the Biden administration is that that's where things go in the U.S.
Hmm.
Where, and I think if you look at the executive order that came out, I mean, you
Right,
step
right,
back for
right.
a moment, it's really extraordinary. You know, like no U.S. president had really ever spoken about cryptocurrency or Web3 or virtual assets, and now we have an executive order on the topic,
It's
basically
fantastic. Yeah.
calling for U.S. leadership in the world. And I think what the attempt of that EO was to really do is to kind of do what you're describing, or maybe what's going on in other countries, and that is
Hmm.
sort of require these regulators, whether it's the SEC and thinking about sort of the securities aspect of this, or the CFTC thinking about sort of how to regulate the commodity and are these commodities, and then you have Treasury that's dealing with everything from domestic finance to illicit
Hmm.
finance. You have the Fed dealing with a CBDC. I think this executive order is saying, hey, if we're going to really lead in this world, in the space, in crypto and Web3, we're going to need to have a consolidated whole of government approach. So I think
Hmm.
that's at least sort of the clarion call. Quite frankly, like in a country this size with this many regulators, I don't know how it entirely plays out.
Right.
Do we end up? I've heard some people call for an entirely new regulator to
Hmm.
deal with
Hmm.
virtual assets, digital assets. Then I've heard some folks say, like, look, maybe the SEC is best situated to do this. Some
Hmm.
say the CFTC. I think the White House is looking for something more like what you described, and that is, a whole of government approach where it's sort of one stop shopping. I
Hmm.
will say that, like, look, the US, there's a call to lead in the world in this space, but there are so many regulators globally doing tremendous work. I mentioned, UAE a few minutes ago, Abu
Hmm.
Dhabi, Dubai. You mentioned FINMA. I mean,
Hmm.
when I was at Treasury, the Libra project, Facebook's sort of now defunct
Yes.
stablecoin project launched. And I got on a plane with my boss, who was the undersecretary for terrorism and financial intelligence, and
Hmm.
we went to Switzerland and we met with FINMA, who really at that moment put out the first ever guidance on stablecoins
Right.
in response to Libra's application. And what people don't understand is, like, now you have Circle and you have hearings on the Hill on stablecoins. We have the president's working group coming out with a white paper on it. It's like, you know, it was revolutionary at the time for a regulator to come out and talk about what would a regulatory framework for stablecoins look like. And I think that's what we forget. But I think if FINMA is really sort of very very early, very forward leaning in this space.
Yeah, I think what's interesting in working with our law firms and other partners in Switzerland is that FINMA takes an approach where they actually do want the industry's input. People on the front line building the solution, what do they think, right? In the US, while there are lobbying efforts and stuff like that, it seems like it's still occasionally there is open dialogue, but sometimes there's a little bit of a standoff. It's like, hey, I'm still a regulator. Can I
Yeah.
reaffirm that?
Yeah,
It's
if ever there was a
posturing.
space if ever there was a space that was right for, like, really true public-private,
Yes.
partnerships,
Yes.
this is it. And I think that from my experience at TRM, regulators are very, I think are very open to having these
Mhm.
types of conversations because also, look, the technology is the what is possible. And I
Yeah.
think part of what we do is really kind of try to educate, regulators and policymakers on sort of like what is the possible of these tools and how can they inform regulatory frameworks.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think one of the things in the front line of doing development, we design protocols and our protocol integrate with other people's protocol because, when you use a stable coin within any type of, we build payment protocol that does what we call spend mining, which is a fancy way of saying credit card points, right? So the incentives are not given randomly to people who stake, but to consumers and customers of yours that's actually buying real economic value, commercial product. And with that, getting a little bit of slice of rewards and right to have a say in the thing. So we believe this idea of following that kind of commercial transaction, the credit card point, American Express membership rewards is a different analogy, looking at the same underlying asset, but with very different types of comparison to how is reward points regulated? How are
Yeah.
airline miles and status regulated? What if an airline status and an NFT? Could you transfer them? Then it suddenly creates some really interesting conversation. Is that a CFTC issue?
Yeah.
Is that
It's what
FCC issue?
I'll tell
What
well,
is
yeah,
it?
it's a great question. And I just tackling this for a moment in just the pure money laundering context. FATF has literally come out and said there are non-fungible goods out there that are not regulated, right? And they look
Right,
to airline miles as one of those sorts of things because
right.
I think their argument was that there's no secondary market for airline miles, that belong to you personally. They are non-fungible and they belong to you. You cannot
Yeah,
transfer them, that you cannot
yeah.
use them for payment,
Non-transferable or transferable in very limited
very
circumstances of
limited circumstances.
families and yeah.
So what they have said is, like airline miles, and they've used these analogies before. They said, like airline miles, um, NFTs that do cannot be used for payment or cannot be used essentially for investment
Yeah.
are not virtual assets for purposes of regulation.
Interesting. Yeah.
But they said if an NFT can be used for payment, if it can be used as an investment, my take is if it can be used to transfer value, then it
Right.
is going to be then it could potentially be regulated as a virtual asset. And
Yeah.
why is that important? And you know better than anyone. It's important because the NFT use case today is just that, right?
Right.
They're
Right.
being used for payments. They're being used, you're not buying necessarily a board ape to, leave it on your phone for the rest of eternity.
Yeah.
You're buying it as an investment. You're looking to you to ultimately transfer value.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. But regulators are always worried about things that you can move quickly, and
Yes.
transfer value. And NFTs definitely present a lot of those risks. I think there are a ton of ways to mitigate those risks as well, to allow the space to really flourish.
Do you think the NFT market, in terms of the interaction in the online ledger, and fits to the same model as like a more traditional, like kind of like cryptocurrency assets from the perspective of detection and prevention, or does it present a whole different type of challenge because they're non fungible?
So I believe there's a lot of parallels here. I
Mm.
think there's some significant differences. We can get into those. But Christy, I have to point out that you just used the phrase traditional cryptocurrency, which I love that that's something we can say today. That I
Yes,
love
yes,
I
yeah,
love that that's something we can say today. But
yes.
look, honestly, like, so I can tell you from a pure perspective of TRM and the way we do compliance. We do compliance very, very similarly for our clients who are NFT issuers, NFT
Mm-hmm.
marketplaces, as we do to our crypto business clients. We have really unique visibility into flows of NFTs,
Mm-hmm.
because essentially we cover Ethereum, we cover Solana, which
Right.
is where the majority of the NFT activity is occurring these days,
Yes.
and we natively cover certain token standards like ERC20. So whenever you issue a token under one of these standards, we natively cover them.
Yeah.
So we have pretty close to full visibility on the NFT space, and we're tracking and tracing NFTs in our tool the same way you do cryptocurrency. Obviously there are some differences, sort of just given the sort of non fungible, the unique nature of where these are hashed to a blockchain.
Yeah.
But the I would say that honestly, the compliance paradigm is very, very similar, if not the same.
That's really comforting because I think one of the things about NFT is that they can represent many things, but the nice things is that they are in wallets. They are, kind of have to be funded somehow, sometimes with some gas to, minting in the heat of the moment requires quite a bit of gas, and you're
Yeah,
gonna likely get some of those gas from a regulated exchange, right? So that does, provide that kind of network and connectivity to the infrastructure that seems to be shared with other type of crypto asset, including
yeah, no,
ERC20s.
really well said.
Yeah. Do you see the consumer adoption of NFT? Now, right now, we're still in a way where people who see themselves as NFT users tend, that word is weird, right? They're the NFT traders, right? They're still trader first. NFT is a modifier. They're still taking a trade ahead on this kind of appreciation as a primary goal. But we are seeing, for example, NFT used for gating certain Discord community group that may have less of an investment value. Maybe it hasn't gone up or wouldn't likely go up. But these NFTs are kind of like tickets or membership cards to that. What do you see those kind of user NFT? Does that increase the number of people NFT and therefore add more noise to the signal of the high value transaction? Or you don't really think that's a bad thing? Do you want more people to use NFT on a day to day basis?
I think we do, and I think it's really more because it's extraordinary technology. This
Hmm.
idea of being able to hash a unique thing to a mutable location on a public ledger, to me, is a really extraordinary technology. Look, and I'm not one of these people who says, like, I don't get it. Like, I get it. I think Bored Apes and Crypto Punks and NBA Top Shot, it is so cool.
Hmm.
My kids and I have two boys that we collect NBA Top Shot together. We go to all
Nice.
the drops. We collect, we're fans of Duke, so we buy our Zion Williamson NFTs. Like,
Hmm.
we love that. But I will say that we are only at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to sort of the use cases for NFTs. And, like, I'm excited when you can control your own health records because they are hashed to an immutable
Right.
public ledger, right? Like, I'm excited when, I don't ever have to go to a DMV again because I could just pull my title and my registration and my driver's license from an immutable, spot on the blockchain,
Yeah.
that is mine to access alone, right? Like, um, uh, you know, uh, public records, land deeds. There are so many extraordinary use cases that we haven't even really, touched upon.
Hmm.
And, while maybe Bored Apes will ultimately be considered to be some sort of, virtual asset where you can move them and use them for payments. These are things that are clearly not. These are
Yeah.
not virtual assets. They are, one of my favorite stories is I mentioned I went to Duke. There's a professor at Duke named Jimmy Lenz, and Jimmy teaches a blockchain certificate course in the
Right.
graduate school. And he just issued those certificates as NFTs on OpenSea. Okay. Those are not virtual assets. There's no secondary market. But how cool is it that you, like, control that belongs to you, and
Yes.
it is a unique thing that exists on a public ledger. So I think
Yeah.
there are a ton of use cases, and I don't even think we are. I think we are pre first inning when it comes to exploring those.
Yeah, absolutely. We looked at the wallet landscape, the people who use wallet to, like, store Bitcoin and Ether, and we saw, like, what the wallet really is your actual wallet has a membership card. It has, like, maybe, like, punch card for coffee. The wallet should have things you need for day to day lives, not just a vault of your art that you're gonna flip and pass it to your children as heirloom, right? So I
Yeah,
think this idea of a day to day daily driver wallet, it's something that we devoted energy, and we have a team of people working on it, because I think the metaphor that crypto wallet are only for, like, stock investment, like an E-Trade equivalent or Robinhood equivalent, is
yeah,
limiting our imagination of what these Web3 technology can do. We should think about all those, like, oh, let me show you a credential. This is my access to the Duke gym because
yeah,
I'm a big fan and I've earned my stripes and or alumni, and I can come right in. This is all possible. The QR code and everything like that doesn't have to be stored in one company database, can actually be in the ledger and make this open access and cross honoring much easier to do. And that has sought that to me has really not been properly explored
yeah. No, really well
by the
said.
industry.
Really, really well said, yeah, and it's early. It is really early. I think we
Yeah.
forget this because 'cause we're so far down the rabbit hole, so many of us in this space, but, we're gonna see a world just really within the next few years where a lot of the friction is taken out of all of this, where it's a lot easier to use, where it's a lot easier to engage with, and we're gonna see, continued mass, mainstream adoption. But no, really, really great points.
Yeah. So if when you're looking at all of the things that's going on in crypto, obviously we have weeks where things look rosy and there is a correlation to the stock market. And this week's people are pretty depressed. And then next week people will be either more depressed, more excited, depends on where it goes. But
Yeah.
outside of the undulation of the market, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah. So, look, I'm in a very, TRM is sort of in a very unique space within this larger ecosystem, right? We're the trust layer. We're helping build that sort of foundational infrastructure, which to me is stopping bad actors from using or from taking advantage of this new Web3 economy.
Hmm.
And the things that keeps me up at night are typically these sort of existential threats, right? It is not the price of Bitcoin, to be honest with you. I'm
Hmm.
excited for a day where Bitcoin, or I shouldn't say Bitcoin, but crypto is a means of payment,
Hmm.
in a more widespread mainstream way. But
Yeah.
the things that concern me is, look, over the last couple weeks, it's been made clear that North Korea was behind the Axie Infinity, the Ronin blockchain hack. Um,
Mm.
and they use that they are attempting to launder, over $600 million in funds. And, it's one thing when a hack occurs, from individuals or, for greed. It's another
Yes.
when we know that they're going to take that money and directly fund weapons proliferation and
Right.
destabilizing activity. So, look, that is something that really concerns me, and that's why I think it's so important that crypto businesses really focus on hardening cyber defenses against these types of attacks.
Hmm.
I think we live in a world where terrorist financiers are going to want to move money at the speed of the internet, and we
Right.
have to ensure that they're not able to do it. Um, we want to make sure that sanctioned Russians don't use crypto to launder funds. So I think when I think of like sort of like the things that keep me up at night, it's more about sort of like keeping this crypto economy safe, ensuring
Yes.
that bad actors don't take advantage of it. Because look, there's a narrative that I think is entirely wrong, and that is, look, people only use crypto to launder funds. To me, it's quite the opposite. It's a tiny percentage of the overall growing crypto economy, but we
Hmm.
also have to stop bad actors from, taking advantage of it. I think, one thing that I hear all the time is sort of like people say, "What do they say, so do you help businesses meet their regulatory obligations?" And my answer is yes. We certainly do. But more importantly, right, we want to ensure that there's trust in the system.
Yeah.
When I want to send Chris C, funds, I want to make sure that they are going to you, not to
Hmm.
ISIS.
Yeah.
And those are the sorts of things that definitely keep me up at night. But I think there are solutions to these issues.
And I definitely see that we have to keep the small ecosystem we have right now safe and credible and legitimate. Because if we lose this beachhead, this ability to code this open space, and then there will be no space to move to when the
Yeah,
mass
yeah,
want to come, right? So
absolutely.
we just have to hold this thing, almost like a some first person shooter games. Like you've got 10 minutes, you have to hold this place before reinforcement comes, right? And we feel
Yeah.
like we're waiting for the wave of mass adoption, and there is a time we're still vulnerable to that. And I thank you guys for being one of the watchtower and watchguard and trying to make sure that this place doesn't lose the legitimacy before it gain usability.
No, thank you so much. Another great analogy. We're the Alamo,
Yes.
for sure. Yeah, no, you've got a lot of good analogies. I love it. Yes, but yeah, no, it's a really interesting moment. It's an interesting moment for a very nascent space,
Hmm.
and I'm very bullish on it. I just think that it's really important that we work to build trust and engender trust in the system.
Hmm. Do you see, as developers and new people, who have spent their time in either in traditional finance or in fintech, even that's kind of traditional from the perspective of crypto. Um,
Yeah,
if when they're coming to Web3 and they're trying to figure out how they can contribute, as a person who has made that jump, not from Web2, Web3, but like
yeah.
into this field, what is your advice for someone who's considering jumping into this crazy new space in the rabbit hole to keep the sanity and more importantly point in the right direction so that they're actually
Sure.
solving problems worthwhile.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing question. Honestly, I think actually it's interesting. We've seen this real mainstream adoption begin, I'd say, over the last year or so. But a lot of it, I think, in my mind, has actually been fueled by those traditional financial institutions
Mm,
engaging more and more with the crypto space.
right,
For example, I was in London a couple weeks ago. I moderated a panel, um, and it had the heads of digital assets from places like State Street and BNY Mellon, Goldman. There was an institutional head of institutional sales at Coinbase, which is crazy that title even exists, right? Like,
right.
but we are now in a world where there is really more and more institutional engagement with cryptocurrency, and I think that that's a really good thing.
Yes.
And well, I think that's something to watch sort of play out, over the next few years. But I think that look, I think it's really important for folks, whether it's in government, for me, law enforcement and sort of regulatory stuff, whether it's in traditional finance, to bring that to Web3, to bring that to crypto, because I think there's a lot of lessons learned. But I would say you also really have to be willing to just roll up your sleeves and
Mm-hmm.
build. And I think the thing that I've been most invigorated by about this space is like it is just an incredibly energetic, vibrant community of builders who
Yes.
are really dedicated to kind of building this new economy. Um, and that's the thing that's really been invigorating to me. So I think it's a mix. Like don't ever forget what you know because it's going to
Yes.
actually inform so much of the work. But be ready to like challenge your challenge your assumptions and really kind of be
Mm-hmm.
ready to roll up your sleeves.
Yeah, and I think the one things that when people say is Lego block is it really is Lego blocks. Like if I've seen these Lego Master Builder take the same bricks that we have at home to build things that you cannot imagine can be built with those same
Yeah.
bricks, right? And I think what we have in Web3 beyond the technology of blockchain and smart contract and APIs and analytics is that we are able to disassemble what used to be completely separate forms, you know, financial assets, art, media,
Yep.
relationship, commercial, coupons, airline miles. All these things are like when you buy the Lego, they come pre-built as a Harry Potter set, and you have
Yeah.
that. And now we're just gonna say, you know what? Let's take a little hammer and break them all apart. What can you build with the parts? Because the composability that Web3 gives us, open up the design space, create a bit of a regulatory headache of what is this thing that you're building and what rules do I use to govern it and to regulate it. But as an engineer, which is where my background is, I'm really excited about taking things apart and putting it back together.
It's amazing, and that's another great analogy, really, I love it, you have so many good ones, but, like, yeah, no, and it's even just to extend it, but we're also yeah, regulators are trying to engage with this space as you're in the middle of that building,
Yes.
and I
Yeah.
think what regulators are really trying to encourage folks is before you lay that first Lego, you've
Yes.
gotta ensure that there are controls in place,
Right.
and, there's a lot of interesting interplay, but look, I'm very positive on this. I think that, like, when I was at Treasury, I was working with true subject matter experts,
Mm-hmm.
throughout the department. When I was at DOJ, it was really the same, and now even working with traditional financial institutions, they have really sharp teams of folks who are engaged in sort of the technology space, engaged with digital assets, and really kind of thinking about these in sophisticated ways. So I'm bullish on sort of the building, for sure. It's just really key that we get it right.
Yes, and I think this collaboration, you talk about public, private, builders and regulators and people with lawyers. I'm participating in these kind of policy working group, sometimes as the only technologist. And they would ask me like, what's your view on whether the nature of digital asset matters? And I say, well, on one end, the fact that they're all NFT and ERC 721, they don't matter. But how can you tell me a piece of digital art and a ticket to a concert is the same thing? They're not the same thing. The apps are different. So there is this dimensional conversation that I think we all have an open conversation like we have today. I think we can figure out how to make this all work for people.
Yeah, no, me too.
So, well, thank you so much for an enlightening conversation, and thank you for sharing your perspective. And it's rare to get someone who has all these different types of roles and experience, and with all that experience, still get excited on a week where things are not looking as shiny and as before. To say, hey, this is a long game. This is the first inning. You may be down 10 runs, but you may end up having 40 runs on this
It
game.
is,
Who knows?
it is pre first inning, Chrissy, and honestly, back at you. Like it is so much fun to talk to someone with your energy and your passion, and yeah, really
Thank you.
looking forward to continuing the conversation.
That's fantastic. And again, always, as always, thank you for community for spending time with us. We do this every week or so, try to spend time to address different topics and hopefully both educate and inform and find a way to put a different light into this Web3. This Web3 thing is not just about the tech, the acronym, the DAO, and the DeFis. It's really about a new way of saying, hey, can the technology that we've invented help us organize at the same way law and railroad help us organize? Just new ways. There's perils and there's good things, but we work together, we can build a very good Gotham City. So thank you very much, Ari, for your time. And until next time, take care.
Thank you.